The phone screaming at 2 in the morning is never good news. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart already pounding before I even saw the unknown Florida number on the screen. A woman's voice, professional but strained, cut through my confusion. She said she was Patricia, a nurse at Tampa General Hospital. My son Derek was in critical condition, heart attack. Intensive care. Ventilator. The words hit me like physical blows. I asked where his wife was, where Amber was. Patricia hesitated, and in that pause, I felt my stomach drop. She said they'd been trying to reach her for 6 hours. No answer. I was booking a flight before we even hung up. The flight from Columbus to Tampa felt like it took days instead of hours. I sat in that cramped economy seat, watching the sun rise over clouds that looked too peaceful for what I was flying toward. My mind kept circling back to Derek as a little boy, the way he used to grab my hand when he was scared, how he'd look up at me like I could fix anything. He was my only child. After my wife Helen died of cancer 8 years ago, Derek was all I had left of her. He'd moved to Florida 3 years back, right after marrying Amber. I'd had concerns about her from the start, something in the way she looked at things rather than people, but I'd kept my mouth shut. Derek was a grown man. He had to make his own choices. The Tampa humidity hit me like a wet blanket when I stepped outside the airport. I didn't even stop at a hotel. The cab took me straight to the hospital, and I walked through those automatic doors feeling like I was stepping into my worst nightmare. The ICU was on the 4th floor. Sterile white walls, the constant beeping of machines, that particular smell of antiseptic that never quite covers the scent of fear and sickness. A nurse directed me to room 407. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing Derek like that. My son, my 35-year-old son who'd always been so full of life, lay there looking like a corpse. His skin had a grayish pallor I'd only seen once before, on Helen, in her final days. Tubes snaked from his mouth. His arms, monitoring lines traced across screens showing numbers I didn't understand but knew were bad. A ventilator breathed for him, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. He'd lost so much weight. I'd talked to him on video just 2 months ago, and he'd looked tired then. But this was different. This was wasting. Dr. Martinez found me standing there, frozen. He was a short man with kind eyes, and the exhausted look of someone who'd been on shift too long. He explained that Derek had suffered a massive heart attack, extensive damage to the left ventricle, and they'd placed him in a medically induced coma to give his body a chance to heal. The next 72 hours were critical. Survival wasn't guaranteed. Even if Derek made it, there could be permanent damage. I managed to ask the only question that mattered. Would he live? Dr. Martinez's hesitation told me everything. Maybe. Possibly. Too soon to tell. Patricia, the nurse who'd called me, approached quietly. She was younger than I'd imagined from her voice, maybe 40, with compassionate eyes that had clearly seen too much suffering. She mentioned again that they still couldn't reach Amber. Had I been able to contact her? I pulled out my phone and dialed Amber's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice, so inappropriate now, told me to leave a message. I didn't. The hospital had given me Derek's belongings in a clear plastic bag. His wallet, his watch, his phone. I unlocked it with the passcode he'd told me years ago, the date of Helen's birthday. He'd never changed it. The text messages loaded, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Recent exchanges between Derek and Amber. Her asking about life insurance policies, about the amounts, questions about his business accounts, his investments. Derek's responses were trusting, open. He'd told her everything. Further back, I found messages from Derek saying he wasn't feeling well, that something felt wrong. Amber's replies were dismissive. Stop being dramatic. You're fine. It's just stress. In one message from 3 weeks ago, Derek had written that he felt like he was dying. Amber had responded with an eye-roll emoji and told him to take some antacids. My hands started shaking. A hospital social worker approached, a woman named Jennifer, who looked uncomfortable with what she had to show me. She handed me a printout, apologizing as she did. It was a screenshot from Instagram, from Amber's account, posted just 3 hours earlier. The photo showed Amber on a yacht. A luxury yacht, all white leather and polished wood. She was holding a champagne flute, her head thrown back in laughter, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. She wore a designer sundress I knew cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was radiant. The caption read, "Living my best life. Dreams really do come true." The post was geotagged. She was at a marina 20 minutes from this hospital. I looked at the timestamp again. 3 hours ago, while I was in the air, frantic with worry, while Derek lay here fighting for every breath, while nurses had been calling her, over and over, she'd been on a yacht, celebrating. I scrolled through her other recent photos. More yacht pictures. Amber with her arm around a well-dressed man I didn't know, both of them toasting the camera. Comments from her friends filled the feed. "You deserve this. Finally. Living the dream, girl." The social worker watched my face change. She'd seen this before, I realized. She'd seen family members discover betrayal in the worst possible moments. I asked her if I could keep this printout. She nodded. Patricia returned and gently suggested I might want to go to Derek's house, get some rest. I had his keys. I should take care of myself. Derek would need me strong when he woke up. If he woke up, I looked at my son one more time, at the machines keeping him alive, and I made a decision. I needed to understand what had really happened here, because every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't just a tragic medical event. This was something worse. Derek's house was in a development that screamed new money. Perfectly manicured lawns, cookie-cutter Mediterranean-style homes painted in varying shades of beige and terracotta. His place was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a 3-bedroom with a 2-car garage and a small pool in back. I'd seen it on video calls but never visited. Derek had always come home to Ohio for holidays. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The house was immaculate. Too immaculate. It looked like a showroom, not a home. Everything matched. From the gray and white color scheme to the abstract art on the walls that meant nothing and cost everything. It felt sterile. Cold. I couldn't imagine Derek, who'd grown up in our cluttered, comfortable house full of Helen's quilts and my woodworking projects, being happy here. I walked through the living room. The dining room with its table that looked like it had never been used. The kitchen was spotless, gleaming white cabinets and marble countertops. A couple of dirty glasses in the sink. That was all. In the refrigerator, I found meal prep containers labeled with days of the week in Amber's precise handwriting. Something about those containers made my skin crawl, though I couldn't say why. Derek's home office was upstairs. That's where I found the first real clues. The room was chaos compared to the rest of the house. Papers stacked on the desk, file folders scattered around, empty coffee cups, leaving rings on financial statements. This was where Derek had actually lived, I realized. This small room was his refuge. I started going through the papers systematically. Bank statements first. Joint checking account showing regular deposits from Derek's business, a software consulting firm he'd built himself. The withdrawals were normal at first. Utilities and mortgage, groceries and gas. Then, about 6 months ago, the pattern changed. Large transfers to another account, amounts ranging from $5,000 to $20,000, happening every few weeks. I found the account information. It was in Amber's name only. I did the math in my head, then did it again because I didn't want to believe it. Over $600,000 transferred in 6 months. The business documents were worse. Derek's company, which he'd started 7 years ago and grown into a successful consultancy, showed recent changes in ownership structure. Amber had been added as co-owner 8 months ago. I found emails between Derek and his lawyer, Derek asking if it was standard for spouses to be co-owners. The lawyer had advised against it, cautiously suggesting a prenuptial agreement instead, even after the fact. Derek's response was trusting, almost naive. He wrote that Amber was his wife, that marriage meant sharing everything, that he had no secrets from her. More documents showed Amber pushing for full ownership transfer. There were papers drawn up, ready for Derek's signature. Some looked like they'd been signed, but the signature was shaky, almost illegible. Nothing like Derek's usual neat handwriting. I sat down hard in his desk chair. My son had been systematically stripped of everything he'd built. Then I saw the journal. It was underneath a stack of folders, a plain black notebook that looked out of place among all the official documents. I opened it and recognized Derek's handwriting immediately. The entries were dated, going back about 4 months. The early entries were about work stress, normal complaints about difficult clients and long hours. Then they shifted. He wrote about feeling constantly exhausted, about dizzy spells that came out of nowhere. He mentioned Amber being sweet, making him special smoothies and protein shakes to help with his energy. He appreciated her care. The entries grew more concerning. Derek wrote about feeling worse despite Amber's help, about being too tired to go into the office, working from home more and more, about Amber insisting on making all his meals because he was too weak to cook, about feeling like something was seriously wrong, but Amber kept telling him it was just stress, just burnout, that he needed to relax. 2 weeks ago, he'd written something that made me stop breathing. Found pills in my vitamin container this morning that I don't recognize. Small white tablets, unmarked. When I asked Amber about them, she got angry, said I was being paranoid, said she was trying to help me, and I was accusing her of something. I apologized. Maybe I am being paranoid, but I feel so sick. 5 days ago. Can barely get out of bed anymore. Vision is blurry. Heart races even when I'm lying down. Amber won't let me call the doctor. She says I'm just stressed about the business, that doctors will just give me pills I don't need. But this feels different. This feels wrong. I'm scared. The final entry was from 3 days ago. My hands shook as I read it. I think Amber is poisoning me. I know how crazy that sounds. I know how paranoid it makes me seem. But I've been researching my symptoms online, and they match everything I've been experiencing. The fatigue, the heart palpitations, the confusion, all of it. I found a small bag of pills hidden in her nightstand yesterday when she was in the shower. I don't know what they are, but I took a few. I need to get them tested. I need to tell Dad. I need help. Behind the journal, wedged into the back of the drawer, I found a small plastic baggie. Inside were 3 white tablets, round and unmarked. The pills Derek had saved. I stood up so fast, the chair rolled backward and hit the wall. My son hadn't had a random heart attack. Someone had given him one. Amber had given him one. I pulled out my phone and called the Tampa Police Department. Detective Frank Garrison met me at Derek's house for 5 minutes later. He was in his mid-50s, solid and professional, with the careful demeanor of someone who'd heard a lot of wild accusations and learned to separate facts from panic. I showed him everything. The journal, the pills, the financial records, the Instagram posts. I walked him through the timeline, my voice shaking with rage I was trying to control. Garrison listened, took notes, photographed the evidence. When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a long moment. He said he understood my concern. He really did. But he needed me to understand the legal realities. The pills needed to be tested, and that could take weeks. The journal entries, while disturbing, weren't proof of actual poisoning. The financial transfers had happened through accounts Derek had access to, with his passwords, from computers he used. Without Derek able to testify that the transfers weren't consensual, without proof the signatures were forged, it was circumstantial. I asked him what he was saying. That there was nothing he could do? Not nothing, Garrison clarified. He would absolutely investigate. He'd get the pills tested as quickly as possible. He'd look into Amber's background, interview hospital staff, build a case. But I needed to prepare myself for this taking time. The law moved slowly, especially when they were trying to build a solid case that would actually hold up in court. Time was the one thing Derek didn't have. After Garrison left, promising to stay in touch, I sat in Derek's office feeling helpless. Then I remembered Walter. Walter Peterson had been my best friend for 40 years. We'd started our businesses around the same time, back when we were young men with more ambition than sense, and we'd helped each other build them into something real. Walter had gone into law, started a firm that grew into one of the most respected practices in Ohio. He was semi-retired now at 71, but his mind was as sharp as it had been at 30. I called him and explained everything. The whole awful story spilled out. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Walter said, in a voice like cold steel, "That woman belongs in prison." He explained the legal complexities in more detail than Garrison had. Even if Derek survived, Amber could claim the transfers were consensual gifts between spouses. The life insurance was legally valid. But Walter had an idea. If we could prove financial exploitation or coercion, We could get emergency injunctions. We could freeze her assets, stop her from accessing anything while the investigation continued. He knew a judge in Florida, Judge Carolyn Rhodes. She was tough, fair, and didn't tolerate predatory behavior. If Walter presented the evidence properly, she might grant emergency orders. Walter told me he was catching a flight that afternoon. He'd be in Tampa by evening. I was about to thank him when my phone rang. Hospital. Dr. Martinez. He told me I needed to return immediately. My stomach dropped. Was Derek worse? No, the doctor said. Your daughter-in-law just arrived. She's demanding to make medical decisions for Derek. I broke every speed limit getting back to that hospital. I found Amber in the ICU family conference room with Dr. Martinez and a hospital administrator I hadn't met before. She looked like she'd just stepped off that yacht. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, her hair styled in beachy waves. She had sunglasses pushed up on her head. She practically glowed with health and wealth. She saw me and her expression flickered through several emotions before settling on what looked like concerned surprise. Clyde. Oh my God, I just heard. I've been unreachable. My phone died on the boat. I had no idea Derek was even sick. I stood in the doorway, looking at this woman who'd been living in my son's house, spending his money, slowly killing him. I kept my voice level. You've been unreachable for 18 hours while your husband fought for his life. The mask slipped just a fraction. I didn't know it was serious. The hospital didn't make it sound urgent when I finally got their messages. Dr. Martinez interrupted, and I could hear the disapproval in his professional tone. We called you 17 times, Mrs. Brennan. We made it very clear this was a critical emergency. The silence that followed was heavy. Amber's jaw tightened. Then she pivoted, her voice becoming businesslike. Regardless, I'm here now. I need to discuss Derek's care. Dr. Martinez, what are his chances? The doctor hesitated. Guarded. The next 48 hours are critical. Amber nodded slowly, like she was processing difficult information. Then she said the words I'd been dreading. I need to discuss do not resuscitate orders. Everything in the room stopped. Even the sounds from the hallway seemed to fade. I exploded. Absolutely not. He's 35 years old. Amber turned to me, and her eyes were cold. He's my husband, Clyde. Legally, I make medical decisions, not you. The administrator, a thin woman with glasses and a name tag reading Miss Patterson, confirmed it quietly. As next of kin and spouse, that's correct. Amber continued, her voice calm and reasonable, which made it worse somehow. Derek and I discussed this. He wouldn't want to live on machines. If there's no quality of life, if the damage is too extensive, I need to honor his wishes. Every word was a lie. I knew it in my bones. You're trying to kill him, I said. The words came out flat, factual. Amber's face flushed. How dare you? I'm trying to honor his wishes. This is the most difficult decision of my life, and you're accusing me of murder? Security was called. I was escorted out of the conference room, out of the ICU, down to the main lobby. A guard stayed with me, polite but firm. I needed to calm down, or I'd be asked to leave the hospital entirely. I sat in the lobby, shaking with rage and fear. My phone buzzed. Text from Walter. Landed in Tampa. On my way to you. I typed back. Hurry. She's trying to finish what she started. Walter arrived at the hospital like a force of nature. Even at 71, he commanded attention, 6 feet tall and still powerfully built, wearing a suit that meant business. He found me in the lobby, sat down, and made me walk through every detail again while he took notes on a legal pad. Then he made a phone call. Judge Carolyn Rhodes agreed to meet us at her home that evening for an emergency hearing. Walter explained that judges could grant emergency orders outside normal court hours in cases involving imminent harm. This qualified. Judge Rhodes lived in a sprawling ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. She met us at the door in casual clothes, but her demeanor was all business. She was in her mid-60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. We sat at her dining room table, and Walter laid out the case like he was in a courtroom. He presented Derek's journal, reading passages aloud. The financial records showing systematic drainage of Derek's accounts. The Instagram posts showing Amber celebrating while Derek was dying. The pills, which Detective Garrison had already sent to the state lab for expedited testing. The timeline of Derek's declining health corresponding with when Amber inserted herself into his business and finances. Judge Rhodes read through everything, her expression growing harder with each page. When she finished, she looked up at us and said, "This is financial exploitation at minimum. At worst, it's attempted murder." She granted emergency orders on the spot, all joint accounts frozen immediately. All accounts in Amber's name that could be traced to Derek's assets, frozen. Amber was barred from making any medical decisions for Derek pending investigation. Temporary guardianship granted to me. The orders were effective immediately. Judge Rhodes had them transmitted electronically to every bank and financial institution linked to Derek and Amber's accounts. She looked at me and said, "If that woman did what you suspect, she'll pay. I guarantee it." It was 9 o'clock at night. Walter and I sat in my hotel room, exhausted but grimly satisfied. The wheels of justice were finally turning. Then my phone rang. Detective Garrison. His voice was excited. "Mr. Brennan, preliminary tests on those pills came back. They contain digoxin. It's a heart medication that, in the wrong doses, is highly toxic. Combined with other substances, it can trigger heart attacks in healthy people. We ran Derek's blood work from when he was admitted. His levels are consistent with chronic poisoning over several months. I'm getting a warrant for Mrs. Brennan's arrest right now." I closed my eyes, feeling vindication and grief crash over me in equal measure. My son had been slowly murdered, and I'd been right. Garrison continued, "We'll need Derek's testimony eventually, but between the journal, the pills, and the blood work, we have enough to charge her. I'll call you when we've made the arrest." I thanked him and hung up, told Walter the news. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what we'd just set in motion. At 10:15, my phone rang again. Hospital security. They told me Amber had just shown up at the ICU, demanding access to Derek's room. She was agitated, increasingly hostile. Security had her contained in the lobby, but I might want to come down. Walter and I got there in 15 minutes. The scene we found was chaos. Amber was at an ATM in the hospital lobby, jabbing at the buttons repeatedly. I watched her try card after card, her movements becoming more frantic with each decline. She pulled out her phone, her voice rising as she called her bank. I could hear her from across the lobby. "What do you mean frozen? What court order? This is my money." The security guard near her looked uncomfortable. Amber started screaming at the phone. "You can't do this. That's theft. I need my money. Do you know who I am?" She hung up and immediately called another number. Her lawyer, I assumed. Her voice was shrill now, panic overtaking the polished facade she'd maintained. "I don't care what time it is. My accounts are frozen. All of them. I need you to fix this now." Then she saw me standing there, and something in her broke completely. She lunged in my direction, and security caught her. She was screaming, truly screaming, words tumbling out in a rush. "You did this. You had no right. That's my money. I earned it. Do you know what I put up with? Derek was pathetic. Weak and pathetic, and I deserved better. I deserve that money. I've been planning this for 2 years." Security was pulling her back, but she kept screaming. Everyone in the lobby was watching, frozen. Someone was recording on their phone. I just stood there, watching this woman unravel, exposing herself completely. Every word was a confession. Tampa police arrived within minutes. Detective Garrison came through the doors with 2 uniformed officers. He approached Amber, who was now crying, her makeup running, her carefully constructed image shattered. "Stephanie Caldwell, also known as Amber Brennan, you're under arrest for attempted murder, financial exploitation, and fraud." Amber's head snapped up. "How do you know that name?" Garrison continued reading her rights while officers handcuffed her. As they led her past me, she made one more lunge, and the hatred in her eyes was pure poison. "You ruined everything. He was supposed to die. The insurance money, the business, all of it was supposed to be mine. I did everything right this time. This time." The words hung in the air. Garrison looked at me. "We've been investigating her background. There's a lot we need to discuss." They took Amber away, still screaming, still confessing. The lobby slowly returned to normal, people going back to their business, though many were still staring. I sat down hard on a lobby chair. Walter sat beside me. We'd won the first battle, but I had a feeling the war was far from over. 3 days passed in a blur of hospital vigils and police interviews. Detective Garrison kept me updated on their findings, and each new piece of information was worse than the last. Then, on the 4th day, Dr. Martinez found me in the ICU waiting room with news that made my heart soar for the first time in a week. Derek's vitals were improving, dramatically. Once they'd identified the digoxin poisoning, they'd administered specific treatments: chelation therapy to remove the toxins from his system, medications to support his heart function, and Derek's young, healthy body was responding better than anyone had dared hope. His heart function was recovering. The damage was reversible. They were reducing his sedation, bringing him out of the coma. I was at his bedside when his eyes opened. Confused, disoriented, the ventilator tube still in his throat making it impossible to speak. But his eyes found mine, and I saw recognition there. They removed the breathing tube later that day. Derek's first words, in a voice rough from intubation, were, "Dad, what happened?" I gripped his hand, fighting tears I'd been holding back for days. "You're safe now, son. You're safe." Over the following week, as Derek regained strength, he told me everything. The story spilled out in pieces, between physical therapy sessions and medical tests, and each piece broke my heart a little more. He'd met Amber 3.5 years ago at a tech conference in Miami. She'd been charming, beautiful, seemed genuinely interested in his work and his life. Their courtship was intense, romantic. She made him feel special in a way he hadn't felt since his mother died. They married after 6 months. The first year was good. At least, Derek thought it was good. Looking back now, he could see signs he'd missed. How Amber was always vague about her past, her family. How she encouraged him to move to Florida, away from me, away from everything familiar. How she slowly isolated him from friends. The second year, she started talking about money more, wanting to understand his business, his investments. Derek, wanting to trust his wife, opened up about everything. She convinced him to add her to accounts, to make her co-owner of his business. "For our future," she'd said. "For when we have children." The life insurance had been her idea too. $2 million, she'd suggested. Successful business owners should have substantial coverage. Derek had agreed. It seemed responsible. About 6 months ago, he'd started feeling sick. Just tired at first. Amber had been so caring, making him special smoothies packed with vitamins and supplements. As he got sicker, she insisted on preparing all his food, said he needed to rest, to let her take care of him. The sicker Derek became, the more dependent on her he grew. When he tried to see doctors, Amber discouraged it, made him feel like he was overreacting, being dramatic. She controlled his environment so completely that he started to doubt his own judgment. The final weeks were a nightmare. Too weak to leave the house, his heart racing at random times, vision blurring. And through it all, Amber being sweet and caring to his face while slowly draining his accounts and waiting for him to die. Derek broke down when he reached this part of the story. "She was killing me, Dad. Killing me. And I trusted her completely. I loved her. How could I have been so stupid?" I held my son while he cried. Told him he wasn't stupid. Told him predators are good at what they do. That's what makes them predators. Told him it wasn't his fault. But there was more. Detective Garrison came to the hospital the next day for Derek's official statement. After Derek recounted everything, Garrison dropped the bombshell I'd been half expecting. "Your wife's real name isn't Amber Brennan. It's Stephanie Caldwell." He laid out her history like a prosecutor presenting a case. Criminal record in California for fraud and identity theft. She'd served 2 years in prison. After her release, she'd been involved in another case. A wealthy businessman in San Diego named Richard Holloway who died suddenly. Stephanie had inherited substantial assets. The investigation had been inconclusive, ruled natural causes. Heart failure. After getting Holloway's money, Stephanie had disappeared. Changed her name, changed her appearance, moved to Florida, became Amber, started hunting for her next target. "There's more," Garrison said. "She had a partner. The man in those yacht photos, Travis Hunt. He's her ex-boyfriend, also has a record. They've been working together for years. Travis posed as a business associate, introduced Amber to you at that tech conference. The whole thing was a setup from day one. Derek's face went white. The conference. That's where we met. She bumped into me at the coffee station, we started talking, and then Travis appeared. Said he knew her from somewhere, made introductions. It all seemed so natural. It was planned, Garrison confirmed. You were researched, selected, targeted. They found a successful, single man with assets and no close family nearby. You were perfect for their con. The room fell silent. Derek stared at the wall, processing the fact that nothing about his marriage had been real. Every moment, every smile, every I love you had been a calculated lie. But Garrison had good news too. Travis had been arrested trying to leave the country. Both he and Stephanie were facing multiple felonies: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, theft, decades in prison. And all the money they'd stolen was being recovered. Derek would get everything back. Derek barely seemed to hear that part. He just kept whispering nothing was real. Nothing. I stayed with him that night, sleeping in the chair beside his bed. He needed to know he wasn't alone, that he still had family who loved him for real. 3 months later, I sat in a Tampa courtroom watching justice unfold. The trial of Stephanie Caldwell and Travis Hunt was mercifully short. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Derek's testimony was powerful, his voice steady as he described the systematic poisoning, the manipulation, the theft. He'd lost 30 pounds during those months of being poisoned. Photos from before Stephanie entered his life showed a healthy, vibrant young man. Photos from the hospital showed someone who looked like a cancer patient. Forensic accountants had traced every dollar. $743,000 total, moved through various accounts in a deliberate pattern designed to hide the theft. The digoxin pills had been traced to a pharmacy where Travis had worked briefly under a fake name. He'd stolen them, along with prescription pads he'd used to forge medical documentation. The prosecutors presented text messages recovered from both defendants' phones. The messages were damning, casual discussions of murder like they were planning a vacation. From Stephanie to Travis. He's getting sicker. Should be soon. Another few weeks max. Travis's response. Good. I'm tired of waiting. Once he's gone, we split everything 50-50, like we planned. Stephanie again. This one's worth way more than the San Diego guy. We can retire after this. The jury listened, their expressions growing more horrified with each piece of evidence. When the prosecutors played the security footage of Stephanie's meltdown at the hospital, her screaming confession about planning this for 2 years, about Derek being pathetic, several jury members looked physically ill. The defense tried. They claimed the text messages were taken out of context, that the digoxin could have been from contaminated supplements, that Derek had consented to all the financial transfers. But their arguments fell apart under the weight of evidence. Jury deliberation took less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Rhodes presided over the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later. She'd been the one to grant the emergency orders that froze Stephanie's assets, and she'd followed the case closely. She addressed Stephanie directly, her voice cold and precise. You are a predator who saw a kind, trusting man as prey. You systematically poisoned him, isolated him from anyone who might help, and tried to steal not just his money but his life. You showed no remorse, no humanity. Even when confronted, you showed only anger at being caught. Stephanie Caldwell, you are sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the full 25 years. Travis Hunt received 20 years, also without parole eligibility. Both defendants were led away. Stephanie didn't look at Derek, didn't look at anyone. Travis looked stunned, like he couldn't believe this was happening. Derek and I walked out of that courthouse into bright Florida sunshine. Derek exhaled, really exhaled, for what felt like the first time in months. It's over, he said. It's over, I confirmed. But the real recovery was just beginning. Derek spent the next 6 months rebuilding his life. He sold the Tampa house without ever setting foot in it again. Too many bad memories, he said. He moved back to Ohio, got an apartment 10 minutes from my house, started seeing a therapist twice a week. The physical recovery was faster than the emotional one. His heart function returned to nearly normal. He gained back the weight he'd lost. But the trauma of betrayal, of having trusted someone who was slowly murdering him, that took longer to heal. We had dinner together every Sunday without fail. Derek would come over, and we'd cook something simple, sit on my back porch, and talk. Really talk, in ways we hadn't since he was young. He opened up about his fears, his shame over not seeing what Stephanie was. I reminded him again and again that it wasn't his fault, that predators are skilled at deception. That being trusting isn't a weakness. Derek restarted his consulting business, this time based in Columbus. Clients who'd worked with him before came back. Word spread about what he'd survived, and instead of seeing him as a victim, people saw him as resilient. Business actually grew. About 8 months after the trial, Derek mentioned he'd met someone. A woman named Sarah, an elementary school teacher. They'd met at a coffee shop, struck up a conversation about a book they were both reading. He was taking it slow, being cautious. I met Sarah a few weeks later when Derek brought her to Sunday dinner. She was genuine, kind, with warm eyes and an easy laugh. Most importantly, the way she looked at Derek was different. She looked at him like he was precious, like he mattered, not like an asset to be acquired. I pulled Derek aside while Sarah was helping clean up dishes. I told him I approved. "She's good for you." Derek smiled. Really smiled. "Yeah, Dad. I think she is." Then came the letter that changed everything one more time. A year after Derek's heart attack, an official envelope arrived from the San Diego District Attorney's Office. Based on the evidence from Stephanie Caldwell's conviction in Florida, they were reopening the investigation into Richard Holloway's death. New forensic analysis of preserved tissue samples showed elevated digoxin levels. They were reclassifying his death as a homicide. Stephanie would face additional murder charges. Richard Holloway's family reached out to Derek. His daughter Grace called, and I listened to Derek's side of the conversation. Heard him say yes, he'd be willing to testify. Heard him tell her he was so sorry for her loss. Heard him say he understood exactly what she was going through. After he hung up, Derek sat quietly for a long time. Then he said, "I need to do something. Something meaningful." 2 months later, Derek established the Helen Brennan Foundation, named after his mother. It was dedicated to helping victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation, providing resources, legal assistance, and medical advocacy. Derek partnered with hospitals to train staff on recognizing signs of abuse, including the kind that happens slowly, quietly, behind closed doors. The foundation grew quickly. Derek threw himself into it with the same energy he'd put into his business. Within a year, they'd helped over 300 people escape dangerous situations. Several predators had been caught and prosecuted because victims recognized warning signs from the foundation's education programs. Derek started speaking publicly about his experience. At conferences, hospitals, law enforcement trainings, breaking the stigma that men couldn't be victims of domestic abuse. His testimony helped change laws in 3 states, creating better protections for vulnerable adults and mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when they spotted patterns of exploitation. He'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to him and turned it into something that saved lives. 2 years after that terrible phone call at 2 in the morning, I stood in a hospital room again, but this time, everything was different. Sarah had just given birth to a healthy baby girl. She lay in the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant, while Derek held his daughter with tears streaming down his face. The baby was perfect, tiny and pink and beautiful. They'd named her Helen, after Derek's mother. I stood beside them, my own vision blurring with emotion. This hospital room was full of light, full of love, full of hope. So different from that ICU 2 years ago. Baby Helen wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and I felt the weight of what we'd all survived to reach this moment. From death to life, from betrayal to trust, from victim to victor. Derek looked up at me, his face transformed by joy. "We made it, Dad. We really made it." Sarah smiled at both of us, understanding without words what this moment meant. She'd heard the whole story, had helped Derek through the hardest parts of his healing, had loved him not despite his trauma but through it. Derek whispered to his daughter, "You're surrounded by people who will always protect you, who will fight for you, who will teach you to be strong and kind and wise. You're going to have an amazing life, little one." I thought about Helen, My Helen, and how much she would have loved this moment. How proud she'd be of Derek, of the man he'd become through fire. How she'd love this tiny granddaughter bearing her name. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, I sat on my back porch with Derek and Sarah. Baby Helen slept in Sarah's arms, content and safe. We watched the sun set over my backyard, the sky turning shades of orange and pink that Helen used to say looked like hope. Derek turned to me. I've been thinking about everything that happened, about how close I came to dying, about Stephanie and Travis and all of it. You know what I realized? I waited. Evil exists, Derek said. Real evil. People like Stephanie who see kindness as weakness, who prey on trust. But here's what they don't understand. Goodness is stronger. Love is more powerful than greed. Family, real family, will fight to the death for each other, and that will always win in the end. He paused, looking at his daughter. I could have let what happened destroy me, could have become bitter, closed off, afraid to trust anyone, but that would have meant Stephanie won. Instead, I chose to heal, to help others, to build something beautiful from the ashes. And now I have this. I have Sarah and Helen and you and the foundation and a life I actually want to live. Sarah added quietly, trauma doesn't have to define you. It can refine you if you let it. I thought about that for a long moment, then shared what I'd been reflecting on myself. When I got that call at 2 a.m, I said, my world stopped. My only son was dying, and I felt completely helpless. But I learned something through that nightmare. I learned that you can't give up. Ever. Even when the system moves slowly, even when you feel powerless, you stand up, you fight back, you protect the people you love with everything you have. I continued. I also learned that second chances are gifts. Derek got a second chance at life, literally, and he didn't waste it. He built something meaningful. Every day is precious. Every moment with the people you love matters. Don't wait for crisis to show up for your family. Don't assume there will always be more time. Love loudly. Protect fiercely. Fight for what matters. Derek reached over and gripped my hand. You saved my life, Dad. If you hadn't gotten on that plane, if you hadn't investigated, if you hadn't fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, I'd be dead. Stephanie would have won. She'd probably be out there right now, hunting for her next victim. But instead, I said, she's in prison for the rest of her life. Richard Holloway's family has justice. Dozens of people have been saved by the foundation. And we're here, together, with this beautiful new life. Baby Helen stirred and opened her eyes, looking around with that unfocused newborn gaze. She was perfect, innocent, surrounded by people who would make sure she grew up knowing she was loved, protected, valued for who she was, rather than what she had. The foundation Derek created continues to grow. Last month, they celebrated helping their 500th client. Several people who were being poisoned, just like Derek, got help in time. 3 predators were arrested. Lives were saved. Derek speaks at universities now, teaching young people about healthy relationships, about warning signs, about protecting themselves financially and emotionally. He tells his story without shame, helping others understand that being victimized doesn't make you weak. How you respond to it determines who you become. Sarah turned to me that afternoon and said something I'll never forget. You know what the real victory is? It's not that Stephanie is in prison. It's not even the foundation, as wonderful as that is. The real victory is this. It's Derek being able to love again, to trust again, to build a family. It's Helen being born into a world where her father knows how to protect her because he learned the hard way. It's choosing life and hope after experiencing the worst humanity has to offer. As the sun set completely and stars began appearing in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey we'd taken, from that terrifying phone call to this peaceful moment, from death's door to new life, from betrayal to a love that was real, tested, and strong. Derek had fought his way back from the edge. He'd faced the truth of what had been done to him, processed the trauma, and chosen to become better rather than bitter. He'd taken his pain and transformed it into purpose. That's what redemption looks like. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just getting justice, but creating meaning. Not just healing yourself, but helping others heal. I looked at my son, his wife, and their daughter, 3 generations sitting together in the fading light, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible 2 years ago. We'd been through hell. We'd faced evil and fought it with everything we had. And we'd won. Not because we were special or extraordinary, but because we refused to give up, because we loved each other enough to fight, because we believed that truth and justice and family were worth any cost. Baby Helen made a small sound, and Derek lifted her gently, holding her close. He looked at me with eyes that had seen darkness, but chosen light. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For being my dad. For never giving up on me. For teaching me what real love looks like." I smiled, feeling tears I didn't bother to hide. "That's what family does, son. We show up, we fight. We never give up on each other. And that, right there, is the lesson I want to leave you with. Life will test you, sometimes in ways you never imagined. Evil exists in this world. Predators exist. People who will smile to your face while plotting your destruction. But goodness is stronger. Love is more powerful. And if you hold on to that, if you fight for it with everything you have, you can survive anything. Your darkest moment doesn't have to define you. It can become the foundation for your greatest triumph. The pain you endure can become the wisdom you share. The battles you fight can make you stronger, kinder, more compassionate. Never give up. Always fight back. Always choose life. Choose love. Choose hope. Protect the people who matter. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And remember that second chances are precious gifts not everyone gets. Derek got his. He used it to build something beautiful, to help others, to create a family based on real love instead of lies, to take the worst thing that ever happened to him and transform it into the best thing he ever did. That's the power of the human spirit. That's what it means to truly win. Not just surviving the storm, but learning to dance in the rain. Not just getting through the darkness, but becoming the light for others who are still lost. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced betrayal or pain that seemed impossible to overcome? How did you fight back? What helped you heal? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that hope is real and justice is possible, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Together, we can create a community of survivors who refuse to let darkness win. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope you carry this message with you. You are stronger than you know. You are worthy of real love, and you are never alone in your fight. May you find the courage to face your battles, the strength to fight for what matters, and the wisdom to transform your pain into purpose. And may you always remember that tomorrow can be better than today, as long as you refuse to give up.